Electrical Part 2 of 3. Scotch brand electrical tape is the best that money can buy and is only about $1 more per roll than cheap electrical tape. Everyone has seen these ground adapters that you can use for different appliances. They ground to the center screw on your electrical outlet. However, you can't use this unless that center screw is properly grounded, and you need to test the connection with your meter to make sure there is a proper ground, because older homes use metal boxes, and in that case you could probably ground it to it, but a lot of the new homes use plastic boxes. Now when I say box, what I mean is the box that goes in the wall that the receptacle mounts to. With your meter set to 200 volts AC, connect one lead to the center screw of the box, which should be ground. Take the other lead and hook it to the right, insert it into the right terminal of the receptacle, which will be the hot, and you should read 120 volts. If not, that receptacle is not grounded. If you use one of these adapters, be very careful to note how you install this adapter, how you plug it into the receptacle, because as you see here, both the blades on this adapter are the same size. Now, why is it important to make sure that you have the polarity correct? And by that I mean the hot wire on the right side. Because if you improperly hook up an appliance, you could potentially have the metal frame of that appliance, become hot with 110 volts, and that you don't want. Also, in some cases, appliances will not work without the correct polarity, and in other cases, electronics can actually be damaged with incorrect polarity. So this is very important to keep your neutral and your hot wires in the right place. Oh boy, my favorite electrical tool. You're going to love this. I call this my Chirper. All you have to do is hold this up to an outlet to the right hand side that should be hot, and press down on the little pocket clip, and it will chirp like crazy, showing power. You don't have to touch anything, disconnect anything. This tool is just wonderful. I love it. It came from Lowe's. This little tool will even show where there's a hot line or power even through a cord, even through something that's fairly well insulated. But you just need to keep in mind that this tool will show where there's power, but that doesn't mean you have a complete circuit or a working circuit. And by that I mean it doesn't have anything to do with the neutral wire, and it takes the neutral wire along with the hot wire to complete a circuit. And this will not show anything about the neutral wire. So you can have a receptacle with a hot wire, but the receptacle still doesn't work because the neutral wire is either broken or disconnected. Another word of advice here is always make sure this Chirper works. Test it on a known good outlet before you proceed with your project. And I always back up my test with this with a test light just to be sure there's no power when I'm working on something. Because listen, you can't be too careful when it comes to that. I believe it was Reagan that said trust but verify, and those are really good words of advice when it comes to testing electrical circuits. These are called wire nuts. They're used to connect one or more wires together. I prefer to twist the wires together first and then screw the wire nut down over it clockwise. These can also be used to insulate a wire that you might have temporarily disconnected. Just screw one wire nut down on top of your hot wire. These come in different sizes for different size wire, and is usually indicated but not always by the color. And no, I'm not a wire nut. I'm nuts, but I'm not a wire nut. Wire nuts provide a good, easy, quick connection for wires without having to solder. Of course, you can always disconnect and reconnect using these wire nuts too. This shows the metal spring inside this wire nut. Smaller wire nuts don't have a metal spring. To install this from this viewpoint, you would turn it counterclockwise. You can buy small quantities of Rosin Core solder, or you can buy a large spool as shown here. It comes in different diameters, and the Radio Shack personnel can certainly guide you in what diameter to buy if you have any doubts about it. Now when I say Rosin Core, what I mean by that is the inside of this solder has a little passageway right through the center of it, much like a straw, and it's filled with the flux, they call it, a chemical that lets metals be soldered easily. That flux is within the center of this Rosin Core solder. There are many different types of solder, like acid core solder, which is used to join pieces of metal together, which you won't be using here. You use Rosin Core solder just for electrical work. This is also available at Lowe's. Now this is one of my soldering guns, and this is a tool that every household should have. It makes soldering so easy, and it comes with different tips. You can even cut plastic with one of the tips that they have, but it's great for soldering wires, and they come in different wattages, different sizes, but one like this is great for household use. This one is made by Weller, can be bought at many different places. Now this is another great little tool. Since I'm alone, have no one to hold wires or hold things for me to solder, this is just great. It's fully adjustable to hold wires or tubing or whatever it is that you like to solder, and as you see, it also has a magnifying glass. But listen, this little vise is so great for all kinds of hobbies, not just for soldering, but for any other hobby you might apply it to. It has two alligator clips shown here to hold your wires, makes it just great for soldering two wires together. The soldering gun shown previously is really all a homeowner needs around the house for general electrical repairs. However, I'm going to show you some options here. Now these soldering irons from the left one has a real sharp point. I use that for electronic work like radios and TVs, where really detailed work is necessary. The one in the center has a chisel point and is great for all-around soldering. The soldering iron on the right has a suction bulb attached to it. This is called a desoldering iron. It removes solder from electrical components. When you have an electrical component that has several contacts, if you tried to desolder that with a regular soldering iron, that solder would harden before you could move on to the next contact, making it impossible to remove that component. That's why you have to have, if you do electrical work on TVs and radios, a desoldering iron. This is one of my electrical test lights. It has neon lights for different voltages. This works real good. This is very inexpensive, available at Radio Shack and Lowe's. If you have a multimeter, you really don't need a test light, but I like to use it because it's so easy to carry. It also provides a backup way of testing to be safe. This is an automotive test light. This is what you'd use to test your fuses, test your circuits on your car or on your truck. With today's plastics just about everywhere on a dash, it's a little hard to find a place to ground this test light, so you'll have to find a metal stud or screw in order to make good contact to use this test light. To check for a blown fuse, you would just hook this to ground, and then you would probe either side of your fuse. You should have power on both sides of that fuse if the fuse is good. These little automotive testers are available at most any automotive store, and I think Radio Shack as well. It's usually much easier to check the connection at a tail light or a headlight to make sure you have current going to it before you disassemble a tail light. Some of these tail lights are fairly hard to take apart, so having a tester might save you some labor. Now that you know how to check for continuity using the little meter with the continuity setting set to continuity, you can test something like an extension cord. Well, how do you know which wire is which when you get from one end to the other? It's something not many people know. The hot side of this extension cord, if you look at the cord itself very closely, will be smooth. The other side of the cord has a rib on it, and that rib is for the neutral side. So, bearing that in mind, all you need to do is hook your continuity tester from one hot lead at one end of the cord to the other hot lead at the other, and check to make sure that that cord has continuity. This photograph clearly shows the rib on the neutral side of the wire. And remember, the neutral spade terminal on the end of the plug is always larger than the hot terminal. And likewise, here you see the hot side of the cord, which is going to be smooth. Here's another view of the rib on the neutral side. I'm using a test light to check for current at this receptacle, and as you see, I have it. In testing this ground circuit, if I had a proper ground, that 120 volt light would be lit, which it isn't, so this receptacle is not grounded. Shown here is using the meter to check for 120 volts at this outlet. As you see, I'm getting 123 and a little over a half of a volt, so everything's fine. And here I'm testing to see whether I have a good ground. Remember, my house doesn't have grounded receptacles. As shown here, I don't have 120 volts between the hot side and the ground terminal, and I should have. I have grounded receptacles in my basement as shown here. The hot side of this receptacle to the ground terminal, I have 123.4 volts. So I do definitely have a good solid ground.